Let's continue exploring the universe within art and the art within Redstone. My goal for this video series is to help you understand Redstone, starting at the basics and working our way up, so that you can create your very own custom Redstone machines like a code door, or at the very least just mess around with fun Redstone shenanigans. Learning more about Redstone can really open up a whole new world, from quality of life stuff like sorting all of your treasures using item sorters, to building crazy farms to get even more loot. But even the craziest of Redstone designers all start at the same place. We all start at the bottom where we don't know anything. So whether you're trying to make crazy things like piston doors to show off to your friends, or you're just trying to make a more interactive world, maybe adventures and puzzles and dungeons and keys, hopefully this video series will help you understand how to do all of this. And I promise you that no matter how complex Redstone may seem, it all starts off very, very simple. Really, the hardest part about Redstone isn't learning the basics, it's learning how to efficiently compact your Redstone. Redstone can get really, really big, especially when you're just starting off and you don't know all of the different mechanics. But you can still achieve what you're trying to achieve with a minimal level of knowledge. But I'll go more into that near the end of the video, where I go over some quality of life things about starting your Redstone journey. For now, let's start at the bottom and work our way up. The first thing to talk about is Redstone dust. Now, Redstone can either be on, or it can be off. That's it, the end. It really is as simple as that, just controlling what turns on and what turns off. When active, the Redstone dust will power the block that it's sitting on and the block that it's pointed into. And then all of the blocks touching those blocks will also receive power. So any component that can be activated by Redstone can either be activated directly by the dust, or it can be activated just by simply being next to one of the blocks that is being activated by dust. Any block that Redstone is pointing into or on top of is essentially emitting its own Redstone signal. In this example, the lever turns on the dust that is pointed into that orange block. Now any Redstone component touching that orange block will also activate. Now as for placing your dust, this can be a little tricky when you're first starting off. If you place dust next to each other, it will become a line or the shape that you place it. But by itself, it's inherently pointing in all four directions. So this one piece of dust could power all four of these lamps. However, if we place another piece of dust next to it, it now becomes a line. So it is not pointed into that lamp, but it is pointed into this lamp. So the lamp that it's not pointed into would not receive a signal. And some of the other Redstone components, such as the inputs like levers and buttons, will also change the orientation of dust if it's placed next to that dust. One way to think about it is, what shape are you making? If you're making a T, then the Redstone is pointed in 3 directions. But if it's just a line, the Redstone is pointed in 2 directions. Or if you're making a dot, for some reason it's pointed in all 4 directions. I remember this can be a little weird when you're first starting to learn Redstone, especially with things like squares don't point in any directions. So even if this dust was activated, it wouldn't activate any of these lamps because it's not pointed into any of them. Dust actually has to be going off into the direction that you're trying to make it point for it to point into something. Now there are ways to redirect the Redstone and force it to point into something that it normally wouldn't point in, but to be honest, it's kind of an advanced topic. So when you're first starting off, just give yourself a little bit of extra room so that you can force the Redstone to point in the direction that you're trying to make it go. And when placed diagonally up a block, the Redstone will just naturally go up that block. However, placing a solid block above the Redstone can pinch the line, where it's no longer traveling up the blocks. And since the dust is no longer connected, it won't be able to transfer power up the blocks. But there are ways to prevent this from happening, which I will talk about here in a minute. And that's the basics of dust. Now let's move on to the other components. So basically there are 3 categories of components. There are inputs that will activate a Redstone signal. There are outputs, which is what you're trying to activate, like droppers and doors and hoppers. And then there's the Redstone components themselves that will go somewhere in between the two to influence how the Redstone behaves. But really, you're just sending signal from point A to point B, like sending power from a lever to a lamp using some dust. And for the most part, all you're really going to be using is like buttons, levers, dust, repeaters to power like pistons and doors. You don't have to worry about learning all of the components, especially right off the bat. So you're mainly going to be using levers, buttons, and pressure plates. Levers toggle the Redstone on and off, buttons will turn it on for a small amount of time, and pressure plates will be active if there is an entity or an item on top of them. All of these inputs will send strong power into the block that they are placed on, which basically just means that you can pull a Redstone signal out from underneath that block. And of course, it will activate Redstone that is touching that block as well. And it doesn't matter whether the buttons or levers are on the side, top, or bottom of the block. whereas pressure plates can only go on the top of a block and will generally be used to send redstone signal underneath that block. And like we mentioned before, you can activate a redstone component either by sending redstone directly to the component or to a block that is touching that component. So in these examples, if you just send a redstone signal to a block or on top of the block, it will activate the redstone components that are touching that block. So a lot of times, you're just running dust to a block that's touching the component rather than to the component itself. Now, if the dust isn't pointed into the component or the block, it won't activate. Just remember that dust likes to follow other dust, which can change what it's pointed into. Now, like we mentioned before, some components will attract the dust. So like these pistons will force the dust to point into the pistons. So just be aware of what your dust is pointing into. Redstone also has what is called signal strength. This is the number of blocks that the redstone will travel before it loses its signal. By default, this is 15. So redstone will travel 15 blocks away from an input. And this is where repeaters come in. Repeaters will refresh the signal. So if you place down a repeater at the end where the redstone putters out, then it will refresh the signal to travel another 15 blocks. So if you're trying to run redstone really far away, you will need some repeaters to repeat the signal, or to refresh the signal. And that's why they're called repeaters, because they repeat the signal strength. And like we talked about earlier, redstone can go up the side of a block, but if you place a solid block where the redstone is going up, it will pinch it, so it's no longer connected. Now, if you do want the redstone signal to go up the blocks, you can use glass. Placing glass diagonally up from each other will allow the redstone signal to go up and down without being pinched. Now, slabs also work the same way. They don't pinch the redstone, but with slabs, you cannot send a redstone signal down. They can only go up. And that is unique to slabs. Slabs are kind of like a one-way, where they only allow redstone to go up them, not down them. Now, stairs will also not pinch redstone. This is really helpful for decorating. Now also, stairs, slabs, and glass, if you send a redstone signal to them or on top of them, they will not power adjacent redstone components. And this can be helpful when you need redstone there but don't want it to activate anything. And then we have redstone torches. They are basically used to send redstone upwards because they send power to the block above them, which can also be used to activate redstone components touching that block. Sending power to the block that the torch is sitting on will turn off the torch. This means that torches invert the signal, so if the lever is on, the torch will be off. You can also place a torch on the side of a block and turn it off the same way by sending power to the block that the torch is placed on. You can also send power straight up in a 1x1 by placing torches and blocks on top of each other like so. And torches will also activate any adjacent redstone dust or component. And here are some basic examples. So the lever will send power into that blue block, which then activates the dust, and then the dust is pointing into that red block, which will then activate that lamp. And in the same way, this button is sending power into the blue block, which is then activating the redstone, which is traveling up the glass, and the glass won't pinch the redstone, so it allows the redstone to activate that lamp. And here is a basic example of how a pressure plate works. So the pressure plate is sending power into that blue block, which is then activating the redstone dust underneath that block. The activated dust is then powering the block that the torch is sitting on, which will turn off that torch, which will then open the door. In this example, the torch is keeping the door closed, and so turning off the torch is what opens the door. And so really, just play around with different things. When you're first starting off, I recommend just trying to play with the lamps, try to play with some doors, just super basic things where you're just trying to run a signal to a door or to a lamp. Use repeaters to refresh the signal, use glass to not pinch the redstone when going up or down, use torches to invert the signal or to send it up or to send it down. The more you play, the more you learn. And the last thing I want to talk about is be aware that redstone takes up space. A lot of people will build a small house or structure like this, where the interior wall is using the same blocks as the exterior wall. And so there's nowhere for you to really hide the redstone. What I recommend, one of the first things I learned when playing Minecraft and working with redstone, is that if you build an interior section and the exterior section, it allows you to build these little gaps that allow you to run redstone in those gaps. Or if you're building a multi-story building, I like to build utility rooms in between each floor. Not only does this allow you to have a place to run redstone, but it also grants you some flexibility when it comes to redecorating or redesigning. If the floor of your top story is the ceiling of your bottom story, you just have no room whatsoever to run redstone or to redecorate. But if you leave yourself little gaps either in the wall or in between each story, it just gives you some more wiggle room to play. And when starting your redstone journey, this is very important. Give yourself some room to work with. When you're first starting off, your contraptions will be humongous, most likely. My first redstone contraptions were huge, and it's just because you don't know all of the different mechanics. So here we have two machines that do basically the exact same thing. One of them is not optimized and is humongous. The other one is fairly optimized and it's tiny, but it uses mechanics that you probably won't learn until later on. You can accomplish the exact same thing without knowing these mechanics, but the trade-off will be that the redstone takes up more room. Both of these machines open a door with a button and close the door with a pressure plate, and the smaller version will actually toggle the door rather than just have the button turn it on and the pressure plate turn it off. So you can accomplish the exact same thing in many different ways with or without knowing the mechanics. And really, once you learn a handful of redstone tricks, you'll be able to make some crazy things. Now the only trade-off is that it won't be optimized and it'll take up more space. But that is perfectly fine. Just give yourself some space to work with and it won't matter. And that's why redstone looks so complicated. Really, there's not, thousands of different mechanics. There's just thousands of different ways to do the exact same thing. So once you learn the basic way to do most things, you'll be able to, in no time, make your own custom redstone creations. And really, even the most complex of machines use the same, 5 mechanics. And once you learn a single way to do those 5 mechanics, you'll be able to build anything. It might take up more room, or it might be a little less optimized, but it will work just the same as one built by a professional that is super duper compacted, and is just this cluster of different things. So whatever you do, don't give up now. I promise you that it's not as complex as it seems. Once you get comfortable messing with the basic components, and then you can learn a few of the basic mechanics, and then you'll just take off. Again, your machines will just be bigger than people who have been doing redstone for years and years. It takes you a long time to learn how to crunch redstone into tiny areas. But I mean, if you build like a giant redstone room and the machine works the same, that's fine. I remember when I was first learning redstone, I accomplished a lot of the same things that I accomplished today. It just took up more space because I didn't know, half of the mechanics or different ways to compact things. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you liked it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out and makes me happy. And talk to me in the comments. Let me know what you did or didn't like about this video, or if you have any requests. I'm always down to help you out in any way that I can. Tune in next time so we can learn more about redstone together. And before you know it, you'll be building your very own custom contraptions. I really hope to see you again soon, but until next time, I've been your host, OmLedu, hopefully teaching you a redstone trick or two, and reminding you, as always, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye!